morning. The Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation will come to order. This morning we are having a hearing on aviation cybersecurity threats, and I appreciate the witnesses being here today. The reality is stark. Our aviation industry is under constant threat from cyber attacks, up 74% since 2020. With the aviation sector contributing more than 5% of our GDP, that is 1.9 trillion in total economic activity, and supporting 11 million jobs, we have to wake up and take these aviation cybersecurity threats seriously. As we saw in the 1990s, when weakness in the power grid exposed the system to catastrophic failures, we had a similar situation as we are in today with aviation. Like with the utility industry, the solution has to be a strong national standard for resiliency and organizations committed to the highest standard, whether that's voluntary as organizations or something stronger. Because every time we witness these technology failures, consumers are the ones who are left holding the bags. Let me share a recent example that hits very close to home. Last month, SeaTac Airport, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, was hit by a ransomware attack from Reseda Group, forcing airport leaders to shut down various computer systems that run everything from ticketing to display boards to baggage claims, creating confusing environment for passenger and workers, and yes, delaying flights and some flight cancellations. The display boards were down for a week. I personally ran through the airport trying to catch a flight, not sure if I was going to the right gate. I had something on my device, but since all the boards were dark, had no idea whether I was really going to get to my gate or if that would really be the gate. I'm not sure I thought we had a chart picture of that. The displays were down for a week, and employees had paper signs directing passengers on where to get to a gate. Check-in kiosks were down too, forcing passengers to wait in line for paper tickets. Other passengers endured long waits at baggage claim at airport. Staff manually sorted through the checked baggage in the terminal. The airport's internal email system and website went down, and the attack group, which is believed to be a Russian organization, is now threatening to release personal data from airport employees unless the airport pays $6 million worth of Bitcoin ransom. While most systems are now back online 3 weeks later, the airport's website and some internal human resource functions remain down today. I appreciate everything SeaTac's Aviation Management Director, Lance Lyttle, who is with us here today, appreciate him being here to discuss the impacts of this event and lessons learned. SeaTac's situation isn't unique. Across the country, we've seen troubling examples of cyber vulnerabilities in our aviation sector. In 2020, a hacker accessed internal systems at San Francisco International Airport. 2020, San Antonio Airport had its website spoofed, and let's not forget the 2015 incident where hackers claimed he had accessed a United Airlines flight control system through the in-flight entertainment system. That is why we are here today, to spotlight this issue and figure out what more needs to be done, and to let the traveling public know that Congress and the federal government are going to combat potential disruptions to their air travel and safety. The FAA reauthorization bill, which was signed into law, included a subtitle strengthening cybersecurity, including directing FAA to establish a process to track and evaluate aviation cyber threats, designating a cybersecurity lead at the agency. And just last year, TSA and FAA both issued cybersecurity requirements for airports, airlines, and manufacturers. I'm grateful to have Marty Reynolds here today, a cybersecurity expert from Airlines for America, who is here to tell us about emerging threats to aviation cybersecurity and how the industry and government can respond. And cyber attacks and other recent technology outages in aviation, like the NOTAM failure or Southwest meltdown or the CrowdStrike outage, have made it clear that brittle infrastructure won't cut it. In the aftermath of the cyber attack at SeaTac, Port of Seattle Executive Director Steve Metrick said that business and government, quote, needs to invest in cybersecurity, end quote, and, quote, need to be prepared should a cybersecurity gain access to systems, end quote. When airport and airline systems are compromised, it also puts passengers' personal data at risk. For instance, in 2020, hackers stole the credit card information of over 2,000 passengers. And cyber attacks on frequent flyer accounts are up 166% in just the past 3 months. The SeaTac incident created hardships for travelers like non-functioning flight status and, as I mentioned, delays in getting luggage. And it's easy to imagine a scenario where cyber attacks coinciding with other events could cause more cancellations or delays. Even in these difficult situations, airlines must abide by their passenger commitments and requirements. Mr. Breyault is here from the National Consumer League to remind us of those resources passengers have when dealing with flight disruptions. This includes requirements for airlines to provide hassle-free refunds as mandated by the FAA reauthorization. So thank you again to our panelists for being here. I look forward to your testimony, and now I'll turn to Ranking Member Cruz for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If cybercrime were measured as a nation, it would be the third largest economy in the world, costing about $10 trillion every year, up from just $3 trillion 10 years ago. It is a threat that the federal government must take seriously. The transportation sector is often targeted by cyber criminals. No mode of transportation is immune. A 2021 ransomware attack rendered inoperable the Colonial Pipeline, which carries about 45% of the East Coast's fuel. Airlines, pilots' unions, and airports globally have also all been hacked. While the Port of Seattle recovers from the August hack, it appears travelers were largely spared from widespread disruptions. I look forward to hearing from SeaTac Managing Director Lance Lyttle on how the airport responded and any lessons learned. I will note that Mr. Lyttle spent 5 years working for the Houston airport system before going to SeaTac, so I'd like to extend a special welcome to him. Airlines, airports, and avionics manufacturers invest heavily to fortify their technology systems and to protect data. Cyber defenses are expensive and ever-evolving due to the nature of cyber threats. But we should be cautious about placing too much faith in more regulation and reporting requirements to protect us. I am concerned about the dozens of potentially duplicative cybersecurity reporting requirements that regulated entities must already comply with. There may be a better or more effective way to keep critical infrastructure secure than more box-checking compliance activities. Skepticism about new compliance burdens is well-founded. The federal government itself has a lousy track record of protecting data from cyber attacks. Millions of Americans' data have been stolen in government hacks over the past 10 years. And yet the law today gives the federal government more than double the amount of time a private entity has to report a cybersecurity incident. In many cases, federal agencies have little understanding of how regulated industries work. For example, when the Transportation Security Administration first issued security directives on cybersecurity requirements for pipelines, many of the mandates were impractical and had been designed without any private sector input. The TSA set unrealistic timelines for pipeline operators to effectively overhaul their cybersecurity practices and applied cybersecurity requirements typically required for computers, such as updating passwords, to things like sensors that monitor pipeline processes. TSA's security directives created so much confusion that the agency received an unprecedented number, more than 380, of alternate measure requests from operators. Had TSA used a regular rulemaking process with notice and comment, rather than issuing directives to industry without input, those mistakes might have been avoided. On the subject of TSA, I'm pleased the committee is holding a hearing related to aviation security. But we should be looking more closely at TSA's operations as well. For example, more than a year ago, I began an oversight investigation into why 3 mayors of left-wing sanctuary cities were using commercial airports to house thousands of illegal aliens. Not surprisingly, the Biden-Harris administration continues their delay tactics and has yet to provide all of the information that I have requested. The Department of Homeland Security, including TSA, has failed to produce documents and communications requested about the potential security threats illegal aliens pose to airports and airport facilities. Additionally, the FAA has failed to provide requested communications between it and other federal entities about the housing of illegal aliens at airports. Separately, I worked with Senators Merkley and Kennedy on an amendment to the FAA reauthorization on TSA's use of facial recognition technologies at passenger checkpoints. The TSA begged members of Congress to allow for continued facial recognition with no guardrails. Chair Cantwell, I know you offered to Senator Merkley to hold a hearing on this and other topics. I think that's a great idea. The TSA and the DHS must be more collaborative in their work, especially their rulemaking. I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses on their experience working with the TSA on cyber issues and how we can do more to keep the aviation sector safe.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Again, welcome to our witnesses today. We'll start with you, Mr. Lyttle, and if you would please begin, 5 minutes of comments.
Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Cruz, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to join you today. My name is Lance Lyttle. I'm the Aviation Managing Director for Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, which is owned and operated by the Port of Seattle. As you know, the port recently experienced a cyber attack, which we first identified on August 24. The attack and our responsive actions initially impaired some of our operations and inconvenienced passengers. SCA has one of the smallest footprints of any major airport in the nation and was designed to serve approximately 30 million passengers compared to the 52 million we will serve this year. Additionally, we're undergoing a major renovation to better accommodate the traveling public. As a result, the impact to our passengers was magnified, and we regret any inconvenience. We have made significant progress in restoring services and systems. Importantly, at no point did this incident affect the ability to safely travel through our airport or the port's maritime facility. We were able to remain operating by partnering with airlines, utilizing paper boarding passes for lower volume carriers on our common use systems, and coordinating with TSA and CBP. In addition, port employees provided more than 4,000 hours to assist with operating and customer service. Our team was able to bring the majority of the impacted operational system back online within a week. Our internal investigation is ongoing, but we know we were victims of a ransomware attack by the criminal organization known as Reseda. As soon as we identified unauthorized cyber activity, we quickly isolated critical systems. While our efforts to stop the attack appear to have been successful, the threat actor was able to encrypt some of our computer systems and copy some data. The matter is under criminal investigation by the FBI. Reseda sought a ransom payment, but the port has decided not to pay. On Monday, they posted on their dark website a copy of 8 files stolen from port systems and are seeking 100 Bitcoin to buy the data. We're currently reviewing the files published on the leak site as well as others we believe were copied. We will notify any individual whose personal information has been compromised and provide appropriate support. While we are still in the midst of our recovery efforts, we have already identified a number of lessons learned. First, even though we have robust cybersecurity systems in place, cybercriminals are always evolving their tactics. And so we're continuing to work to further harden our cyber defenses, including strengthening our identity management and authentication protocols, as well as enhancing our monitoring. Second, I'm incredibly proud of how our team sprung into action to keep our airport operating, especially over the busy Labor Day travel period. We benefited greatly from partnership with airlines, federal agencies, and our tenants. We also developed workarounds to keep people and bags moving. Many of those workarounds are quite effective and will go into our toolbox for future emergency responses. Also, communication was key. We held daily conference calls, relied heavily on text messages, used temporary signage, and did a lot of in-person communications. None of this is revolutionary, but it's important to have these options already planned for when technology becomes inaccessible. Finally, I want to talk about our goal to be stronger after. We hope our internal investigation and third-party after-action report will identify best practices to improve our resiliency, our emergency preparedness, and our incident response. We will also share these learnings with peers throughout the aviation industry. Congress and federal agencies can help our industry in the face of these ongoing threats. Agencies should continue to prioritize the dissemination of timely, actionable cyber threat information. And we welcome the engagement of congressional leaders to help improve information sharing of industry-wide best practices. Thank you again for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Breyault. Thank you and welcome.
Good morning, Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Cruz, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is John Breyault, and I am the Vice President of Public Policy, Telecommunications, and Fraud at the National Consumers League. Founded in 1899, NCL's nonprofit mission is to advocate on behalf of consumers and workers in the United States and abroad. Today, I will address the serious impact cybersecurity incidents in the aviation industry have on passengers and urge the committee to ensure that consumers are not left bearing the costs of these events. When cybersecurity incidents occur in the airline industry, passengers are often the ones who suffer the most. Flights are delayed or canceled, personal information is compromised, and families can find themselves stranded for days. Recent incidents underscore how an error in one sector can create a cascading effect across the industry, harming millions of passengers. Senator, as you mentioned, last month, a cyber attack at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport resulted in significant disruptions, forcing staff to handwrite boarding passes and manually sort bags, creating delays in both departing flights and bags arriving at their destinations. On July 18th, a faulty update affecting CrowdStrike clients, including Airlines, led to global system crashes, affecting an estimated 1.4 million passengers. Nearly 5,200 flights were canceled on the first day alone. Families were left stranded, with one family in Seattle reportedly losing more than $7,500 while trying to rebook flights and cover lodging costs. Government agencies are not immune to cyber incidents either. In early 2023, an FAA contractor's error resulted in a nationwide ground stop. More than 10,000 flights were delayed and over 1,300 were canceled, once again highlighting the fragility of airline infrastructure to human error and cyber vulnerabilities. While cyber events that disrupt flights generate headlines, the vulnerability of airline rewards programs has the potential to affect even more consumers. The value of unused miles sitting in passengers' rewards accounts is staggering. According to one estimate, the top 5 U.S. airline loyalty programs ended 2020 with a combined balance of $27.5 billion in unused loyalty program miles, up $2.9 billion from 2019. Unsurprisingly, all of those unused miles are an attractive target for cyber thieves. Between the fourth quarter of 2023 and the first quarter of 2024, bot attacks on airline accounts increased 166%. Stolen airline miles fuel a thriving market on the dark web, where crooks redeem these stolen miles for gift cards or by purchasing airline tickets. Despite this threat, U.S. airlines have been inconsistent in their efforts to secure mileage accounts. For example, basic account security tools like multi-factor authentication that are commonplace on other sensitive accounts, like those for online banking, are not available to all passengers. To make matters worse, airline miles are not covered by any of the consumer protections that safeguard consumers' money in other contexts, such as FDIC insurance or the Electronic Fund Transfer Act's anti-fraud protections. Ransomware attacks are another vulnerability for the aviation sector. Boeing's chief security officer last year noted that ransomware attacks on the aviation supply chain jumped 600% in the past year. TSA cited persistent cybersecurity threats against the aviation sector when it adopted emergency security amendments. In the face of these threats, there have been some limited efforts to promote additional investment in the aviation sector's cybersecurity resiliency, but more remains to be done. For example, TSA last year rolled out new rules that require airports and operators to develop cybersecurity plans. And industry bodies like IATA and A4A play a key role in developing cybersecurity standards for the industry. While these efforts are laudable, no amount of investment will prevent all incidents. And for this reason, NCL urges DOT and Congress to take additional steps to protect passengers. Specifically, Congress should pass comprehensive national data security standards legislation to create a baseline of protection for the data consumers share with the industry, including with airlines. Second, the value of airline rewards should be protected from fraud. Just as consumers are not liable when bad actors run up credit and debit card charges, so too should airlines be required to replace airline miles lost to cyber thieves. Third, DOT should require airlines to clearly and promptly communicate to consumers what their rights are under federal passenger protection laws in the event of cybersecurity-related delays and cancellations. Finally, Congress should explicitly codify DOT's authority to promulgate delay compensation rules to ensure that consumers can obtain cash compensation if an airline cybersecurity incident results in a significant delay or cancellation. Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Cruz, members of the committee, we're grateful for your continuing work to protect consumers and for holding this hearing. On behalf of NCL, thank you for including the consumer's perspective as you consider these important issues. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you so much. And we look forward to digging in on a myriad of those issues you brought up. Brigadier General Reynolds, thank you so much. I think you probably had plans to be at a different conference today, but thank you for being here.
Thank you, ma'am. This is important, so I'm glad to be here. Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Cruz, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the critical issue of aviation cybersecurity. I'd also like to thank my fellow panel members, Mr. John Breyault and Mr. Lance Lyttle, for their participation as well. I'm Marty Reynolds, the Managing Director for Cybersecurity at Airlines for America. I've been with Airlines for America for 3 years and spent nearly 3 decades in the military, including time developing cyber policies and leading cyber professionals executing global operations. I can tell you firsthand that our air carriers fully recognize that cybersecurity is one of the greatest challenges facing all critical infrastructure sectors. The capability and capacity of threat actors operating in cybersecurity is growing at an alarming rate, and there are no silver bullets in cybersecurity. To counter these many threats, our carriers have developed mature cybersecurity programs that are risk-based, threat-informed, and constantly evolving to stay ahead of a dynamic threat landscape. Our members' cybersecurity programs and investments are based on these foundational principles. Our North Star will always be the safety, security, and privacy of passengers and crew. They are our industry's highest priorities. This is why our industry continues to make significant investments in information technology infrastructure and cybersecurity. As an example, from 2018 to 2023, U.S. passenger airlines spent approximately $36.5 billion on information technology and cybersecurity, including $7.4 billion in 2023 alone. Our members participate in and lead the development and updating of critical information technology and aviation cybersecurity standards. At A4A, we created a cybersecurity council consisting of the chief information security officers or vice presidents of aviation information technology, where we create industry best practices and lessons learned. And lastly, we consistently engage and collaborate with federal departments and agencies to ensure we understand their policies and regulatory objectives so we can ensure we are compliant with their requirements. While a good foundation exists, there's always room for improvement. Specifically, in addition to the increasing change in the threat landscape, we've also seen a significant increase in regulatory requirements over the past 3 years. This has created a complex compliance framework for airline operators and can divert critical resources away from cybersecurity teams. However, we believe that there are opportunities to address these complexities through a couple recommendations. First, the federal government should continue to find ways to harmonize its cybersecurity requirements. As an example, airline operators are responsible to 10 different federal agencies and departments with existing or emerging or volunteer or mandatory incident reporting requirements. The complexity of reporting environments takes away critical resources from response and recovery actions. We know threat actors will continue to use recovery events as an opportunity for malicious actions. That is why we are recommending that the federal government adopt a single reporting framework. More incident reporting does not equal more security. Although we have concerns with the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency's current version of the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act Incident Reporting Framework, it does offer a single reporting solution. We also appreciate the work the Office of National Cyber Director has undertaken to harmonize cybersecurity requirements, as well as Senator Peters and Senator Langford's recent proposal, the Streamlining Federal Cybersecurity Regulations Act. These are all promising. Second, information sharing among aviation regulators, the intelligence community, and private stakeholders is foundation to the safety, security, and resiliency of the aviation sector. Although federal agencies have made strides to improve information sharing, such as multi-agency threat bulletins Information sharing among federal agencies and with the aviation sector needs improvement. The existing information sharing processes lack the speed of relevance and do not consistently validate if existing policies and regulatory requirements are staying ahead of evolving threats. The airlines look forward to working with the committee and share cybersecurity challenges and appreciate the opportunity to discuss our role and involvement, along with recommendations to improve cybersecurity. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you again to all the witnesses for your testimony. Mr. Lyttle, you said something in your testimony that just needs a little more emphasis. You're saying our capacity at SeaTac is for 30+ million people, and we're at 52 million a year. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, we're originally designed for, the current facility is designed for approximately 30 million, and we're doing 52 million this year.
So we're already stretched.
Yes, we are.
And in addition, you're doing construction right now, so that's an additional stretch.
That complicates it even more. Yes.
Right. So do you think Seattle was specifically targeted?
I am not sure why we were targeted. Our understanding with Reseda, they have targeted organizations in the USA, outside of the USA, within the aviation industry, but also outside of the aviation industry as well.
So, so you don't have any specifics of why you think SeaTac was on this particular event singled out?
Not at this point.
Okay. And what do you think now? I know you're still in the middle of the investigation, and you also don't want to reveal information that might aid and abet others in this particular area. But isn't hygiene a particular aspect of this? We know this from other sectors who have been attacked. Isn't the ability for people to attack can come in all sorts of very easy ways, from phishing and other events. I didn't hear anybody talk about this as part of a concern, so I just wondered where you were on that issue.
Yeah, all the various different cyber attacks, whether it's phishing or whether it's a ransomware attack or denial of service attack, they're all concerns for us. We have successfully in the past thwarted denial of service attack, phishing attack. We continuously do exercises. We have internal and external audits that we conduct on a regular basis to minimize the impact of any cyber attacks on our environment.
So will we learn what exactly happened? Will we at least have access to that information, even if?
We'll be conducting an after-action report, independent after-action report, and that will be available.
Okay, and what's the timing on that?
We're not sure as yet. We're focusing on recovery right now, and once we have done that, then we'll conduct the after-action report, and we'll share this industry-wide as well as with the committee.
Well, I think to Brigadier General's point that this information sharing is critical, and since so many organizations within our government think that they have a hand in cybersecurity, which they do, this information sharing kind of gets lost. And what we have seen, whether it's other sectors, whether we mentioned pipelines, casinos got attacked. I remember talking to somebody, the first casino, nobody said anything. The second casino, then it leaked out. The third casino, they wish they would have known, because then they would have taken steps. So one of the reasons why we wanted to have this today is because we definitely want people to have information about these attacks and what we need to do. Brigadier General Reynolds, one of the things that we've done is this rulemaking authority through the FAA bill, and an ARC, an aviation rulemaking committee being set up. Does A4A plan to participate in that ARC, yes or no?
Senator, thank you for the question, and yes, absolutely. We're excited that the ARC has been established and look forward to the charter to be released, because we would like to participate.
And what do you think that can do to establishing some sort of focus here on cybersecurity requirements that airports specifically need to look at?
I think anytime there's an opportunity for industry and government to work together to come up with recommendations, generally provides the best set of recommendations. The opportunity to work directly with FAA through this ARC, we know can lead to better outcomes and better recommendations. So we're excited. It's the first time we've actually had the opportunity to work in this for cybersecurity specifically. So we're looking forward to participation.
So it's fortuitous that we have this process established.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you again for putting that into the reauthorization. We're looking forward to it.
Okay, Mr. Breyault, you mentioned a lot of things here, and when you think about it, The consumer is who we're trying to protect. We're trying to protect our citizens, but we're trying to also protect consumers from the impacts of an underinvestment in this particular area. What do you think is most important in that, in the protection of the consumer? Is it at the airport and ticketing, or do you think that these are leading to individualized attacks, as you said, as that information is then available on the web?
Well, Senator, I would say that there are vulnerabilities that impact consumers throughout their interaction with the aviation industry. There are vulnerabilities that impact the safety of the data they provide, for example, to rewards programs or through the frequent flyer miles, through the information they share with TSA when they are for security purposes, through the actual physical impact that they have when these events happen, the being stranded at the gate, missing important family events, running through the SeaTac airport not knowing which gate you're supposed to go to, are all impacts that happen. And so I think the cost here really needs to be measured in how do we help consumers recover when these occur? Because all the investment that I'm glad to see A4A and other industries making in this is not going to prevent all the cyber attacks. As General Reynolds said, there's no silver bullet, and I completely agree with him. So I think what we also need to do, in addition to thinking about how do we prevent these cyber attacks from happening in the first place, how do we create incentives to help consumers recover when they do occur? Because ultimately they're going to occur and consumers are going to be impacted. So what do we have in place to help make sure that those harms are mitigated as much as possible?
Thank you. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Recently enacted FAA reauthorization includes a subtitle on establishing an FAA cybersecurity lead, tasked with setting cybersecurity policies and guidance on FAA-regulated aviation operators and avionics. General Reynolds, how have these provisions in the FAA Reauthorization Act helped to protect the aviation industry from a cyber perspective?
Senator, thank you for that question. There are a couple things in the reauthorization in particular I'd like to highlight. One, of course, is the establishment of the Aviation Cybersecurity Rulemaking Committee. We think that's a very, very good next step. The second is that inside that reauthorization was a clear call out that the FAA has sole jurisdiction when it comes to rulemaking on cybersecurity around avionics, propellers, and the ground system support systems. Both of those are very, very helpful for us. It's not just at the fact that they identified them as it is a roles and responsibility issue that goes to harmonization as well.
And how does the federal government do abiding by those same standards? In 2022, Congress enacted the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act, which generally requires critical infrastructure to report substantial cyber incidents to the federal government within 72 hours. A proposed rule is pending that would implement this law. General Reynolds, do you happen to know how long federal agencies have to report a major cyber incident to Congress?
Sir, I believe that's 7 days.
That's a lot longer than 72 hours that airlines and airports have to report an incident to some of those same agencies. What about the types of incidents agencies must report to Congress? If an agency suffers a cyber attack, what is the number of Americans who, if affected, would automatically trigger a notification requirement?
Sir, Senator, if you're talking for the federal side, I believe it's 100,000.
Turning back to the incident reporting requirements for critical infrastructure, depending on the circumstances, could the proposed rule require critical infrastructure operators to report a cyber incident that affects only one person?
Yes, sir, and I think the other part I'd offer too is that of the 10 different regulatory requirements that we have for incident reporting, some again are voluntary, some are mandatory, that the definitions around each are different. The reporting requirements are different, the thresholds are different, timing is different. So to say any one specifically is different, they're all different.
Well, that certainly seems inconsistent and potentially overly broad. I should note that my colleagues across the aisle seem to agree. Several of the Democrat authors of the law have written comment letters criticizing the excessive breadth of the proposed rule. The federal government is also not much better at securing its networks against cyber attacks. Time and again, agencies have been hacked and lost sensitive records on the citizens they're supposed to serve and protect. recognizing the regulatory state's proclivity for duplicative regulations without regard to economic burden, Congress included a provision in the Cyber Incident Reporting Law to ensure a report to one agency is a report to all agencies. It also required that agencies take steps to harmonize their cyber incident reporting regulations. General Reynolds, how is that harmonization effort going today, and how many cyber incident reporting regimes is the aviation sector subject to?
Sir, as I meant in the written testimony in my opening remarks, it's 10. That's a number that we have to report to. And again, that's an emerging, existing, that's voluntary and mandatory. In terms of the harmonization, I do want to call it at least on one side. The FAA in particular is using the TSA's requirements and its process. So there's one example where harmonization is in fact happening. We still believe, though, as CISA continues to work through its comments on CERCIA, we believe that is showing a very good option for a single reporting option for us.
Let's focus on the TSA specifically. What are a few examples of recent cybersecurity directives issued by the TSA?
Sir, it's somewhat similar to the timeline you talked about, the pipeline. We are operating off an emergency amendment. In that side of that amendment, there is mandatory reporting. Also in that, there's an assessment and then also the development of implementation plans, as well as an assessment plan. Today, our carriers have had their implementation plans approved. We've had the assessment plans reviewed, and now we're moving on to the compliance framework.
And has the TSA used notices of proposed rulemaking in advance of issuing these directives to ensure that regulated entities can provide their expert notice and comment on those directives?
Sir, they did initially. We did provide comments. I think they felt, and if they had good reason and rationale for the issuance of an emergency amendment, in that process, there isn't the opportunity to provide comments. So we've been working very closely with them. We have a good working relationship with TSA. We work with them to make sure we understand our compliance requirements, and they ask and work with us to make sure they understand how we do threat-based risk-informed programs so that their compliance program actually complements what we're doing today.
The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, DHS, the same CISA that works with the FBI to pressure social media companies into censoring conservatives, is in charge of implementing this legislation with the National Cyber Director. So we shouldn't be entirely surprised that the Biden-Harris administration has failed to implement the legislation in a measured and reasonable way. What can be done to simplify and harmonize the various regulatory burdens being placed upon aviation?
Sir, I think first I'd just pick incident reporting. I mean, 10 seems like it's too many. So if we can find a single reporting framework that can be adopted by all federal agencies and departments, and that department can then take the information, consolidate it, and analyze it, and get it out to not just the other federal agencies, but also to the private sector, critical infrastructure sectors, we'd all be in a better position. The last thing I think anyone would want to do during a recovery and response issue is having to worry about going through a compliance matrix and figuring out which time, where do I have to report different elements. And I don't think the federal government's response would be any better if you get 10 different agencies receiving information at different times and different periods.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Hickenlooper, I think we got you in under the clock. I know you have to preside at 11, so.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank all of you for being here today and your public service on these issues. Mr. Breyault, ransomware attackers often attempt to shut down computer systems and steal confidential data that they can extort businesses or individuals, somehow basically stealing the data and trying to sell it. Keeping consumers' data secure, making sure that we don't collect excessive and unnecessary data, also helps reduce risks from financial fraud and scams while, again, protecting people's privacy. What proactive steps, Mr. Breyault, can businesses take to protect their customers and employees' sensitive and personal data?
Senator, thank you for the question.
I'm not an expert on what businesses themselves should do, specifically what tools they should implement, but I know that there are strategies that agencies like the Federal Trade Commission have and advice they provided to those businesses, and I think you alluded to a few of them. Number one, it's doing an inventory of what information you're actually collecting to find out where you, then to find out, do you actually need that information to conduct the business? And if you don't need that information, can you minimize the amount of data that you're holding on to? As long if you're reducing the threat vector, the number of places, the number of bases you have to cover, and to use a baseball term, it's easier to play defense against the cyber thieves. Then knowing how to get rid of that data securely, get rid of data that you're taking in as part of your business securely, and then finally having a recovery plan in place when all those other things you've done don't work, so that consumers at the end of the day can help to, your customers can recover from that.
Sounds like sound principles to me. Mr. Reynolds, cyber attackers attempt to cause disruption in order to create urgency for victims to pay ransom. A quick recovery is in the interest of the business, in the interest of its customers, also reduces the leverage that attackers used to try and extort their victims. As we've seen in some notable cybersecurity incidents, it can take weeks or months for impacted organizations to fully recover. In addition to what, excuse me, in addition to what Mr. Breyault was describing, can you describe what steps your member companies take to prepare and practice recovering from cyber attacks as part of their cyber resilience? So not necessarily the preparation, but the recovery.
Senator, thank you for that question. I think I'll start with our North Star, which is we always keep safety, security, and privacy of our customers at forefront. Our programs are risk-based, threat-informed. They have to evolve with the threat. Some of the things that we do in terms of coming up with ways in which we can improve are things like tabletop exercises, policies and programs and training. One example I might have is that although we do tabletop exercises and exercises and planning internal to each of our companies at the industry level, we also work with the federal government. So there's, and in fact, this week at a conference, the Aviation Information Sharing and Analysis Center is conducting a global exercise where they bring in federal regulators and the airlines and airports to work through a very comprehensive exercise so that we can all learn. We can get a report from that, we can look at gaps and seams so we can all improve. We've done the same thing with the FAA recently. They have the Aviation Cyber Initiative that we participate. We took 6 months to actually build out a program with them and participate in an exercise with them. It's a comprehensive program, sir.
Great, appreciate that. Mr. Lyttle, a very sobering event that you had to go through. Just so far, what lessons would you want to share with other airports in terms of things that could be useful, lessons learned?
Some lessons learned, as was just mentioned, for example, is to actually go through and do tabletop exercises. We were fortunate that we actually did a tabletop exercise which simulated a ransomware attack in the past. I can tell you, in reality, it's a whole lot more complicated, but it actually helped. Also, having continuity of operations, COOP plans in place. Every department at the port is required to have a COOP plan, and we had to activate those really fast. Also, to practice your NIMS, and activating incident command, emergency management policy rooms, practicing that over and over again. And then partnering with, of course, the federal agencies such as CISA, the TSA, and also outside subject matter experts, and conduct various different, like ethical hacking. Do that on a regular basis to test
right.
your environment.
Well, I'm out of time, but I do think at some point also it would be worth looking at, are you getting rid of data that is no longer necessary? In other words, you saving data and therefore making yourselves or your consumers a target.
Yeah, my recommendation, if you don't have to store sensitive data, don't, but if you have to, ensure that it's encrypted.
Fair enough. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you all for the hearing today. We appreciate that. Mr. Reynolds, I want to come to you first and talk about the known crew member program. One of the things that has come to our attention is the abuses there. I know earlier this year, 4 flight attendants allegedly smuggled millions of dollars in drug money out of the U.S. using that known crew member lane at JFK Airport. We've also learned that 2 hackers discovered a vulnerability in the system that allowed them to create profiles for fake employees. And this was giving them access to areas beyond the security checkpoint. So what efforts are you taking to make certain that this is secured?
Senator, thank you for that question. The known crew member program is not something that I personally deal with, particularly. That's not my area of expertise. I will say, though, the program is among key stakeholders, including TSA, A4A, and ALPA. It's a program that to help facilitate screening of trusted population of airline crews, and it involves close collaboration to ensure that cybersecurity of those systems. Because I'm not the expert in that, ma'am, I'd love to take your question back and actually talk to our leads and provide you more comprehensive. I want to make sure my answer is correct.
I would appreciate that. I think that's something that is important to each of us, especially when you look at the issues that are in this country with the drug trafficking and the cartels. And that's a point of concern and indeed vulnerability. But then to find out that hackers have found a way to get in and create these fake profiles, I would like to have some more information on that and then be able to decide if there are other actions that we should take. You all talked a minute earlier about information sharing, and as we look at 2030, when there are going to be 32.1 billion devices connected to the internet here in the US, I think that this is going to need more attention when you look at that timeliness and the importance of streamlining reporting requirements and streamlining how you increase this information share. So you've made a couple of comments, but I want you to drill down a bit on what you would do with the streamlining process.
Senator, thank you. And to talk on the information sharing piece of it, our threat risk-based programs, our information sharing is absolutely critical to it. And when we talk information sharing, there's 2 elements I think they're important to make a distinction about. There's the information sharing that is necessary to protect your networks with what the adversary is trying to do immediately, like within the short order. Whether that's tactics, techniques, and procedures, it's incidents or compromise. It's that kind of level of detail that you know that your program is either safe or you have to make corrections. There's a second part of the information sharing that I want to highlight too, and that is that same kind of level of information. How is it being used and can it be used to inform requirements, policy requirements, and regulatory requirements to make sure they stay ahead of the evolving threat landscape? So those 2 pieces, we would love to see those actually improve and in fact bring in more industry input so that we can ensure that the information shared not just among and across. As an example, I just want to call out the CTAC team because they did an amazing job of pulling industry together so that we can understand what was happening, not just operationally, but from a cybersecurity perspective. They were able to share techniques, and procedures. They were able to tell us who they think the actor was, and that way we can go back to our own networks and make sure they were protected.
Well, and we also think workforce is an important component of this. And Senator Rosen and I have a bill that would work on training that workforce. I am just about out of time, so I'm not going to. I do have a question for Mr. Lyttle. I'm going to submit this because when it comes to ransomware and the demands that are there, and of course, the targeting that you all went through, we think that the relationships with the public and private partners are very important. And I will submit that question to you for a written response. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thanks for doing this important hearing. So the recent CrowdStrike outage, we all know, plagued our airports, plagued our transportation, and it was caused, as we all know, by a flaw in this security update. Mr. Breyault, in your testimony, you highlight the growing trend in ransomware attacks in the aviation center. Can you speak to how investing in secure interoperable networks can protect consumers while something else was going on here with CrowdStrike?
Senator, thank you for the question. I would respond to that by saying that more investment in cybersecurity resiliency will help address not only the ability of aviation networks to resist hacking, but it would also give them resources to help train the staff who interact with those networks. I think, as most experts in cybersecurity will tell you, humans are often the weakest link in any cybersecurity chain. And so Chair Cantwell talked earlier about the need for greater hygiene to get staff and other people who interact with these networks to avoid things like clicking on suspicious links that can subject an entire network to a ransomware attack that ultimately shuts it down and has these dramatic impacts on consumers, the missed flights and things that I talked about. I think one thing that hasn't come up yet that would, I think, also play a role into this is the emerging threat of AI. We are very concerned at NCL that the bar to entry for cyber thieves to conduct these ransomware attacks is really going to be dramatically lowered because of the ability of AI to make it easier for people who may not have the same skill set that you may have needed 5 or 10 years ago to commit a ransomware attack to commit one. So the number of threat actors out there, we fear, is only going to multiply. And so the kind of investment that we need in cybersecurity resiliency is more urgent now than ever.
And Brigadier General, what additional tools and skills will our current cybersecurity workforce need to be able to deal with this?
Senator, thank you for the question. As you point out, there's certainly a shortage of IT professionals in this country. One of the things from the aviation perspective that we work very closely on is that it's hard to find IT professionals that have both IT experience and aviation experience. So in many cases, we have to bring folks in, and we provide them that additional training so they understand the specifics of aviation IT. And so that would be one thing I would say that for companies that are looking for folks to populate their team, is that you have to think about, how do you internally train these folks? You know, how do you actually bring them on board and actually provide them the necessary skills to not just stay ahead, but understand the industry they're participating in?
And just last question, Mr. Lyttle, just on the same topic, in your testimony, you note how federal agencies like Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency have helped the Seattle airport improve workforce development. I think we've got 464,000 unfilled cybersecurity jobs in the US. 1 in 3 of those unfilled jobs are in the federal government. Tell me what you think the federal government should do to get those numbers to be in a much better place.
So, well, we can pay people more, but one of the things I think we can do is we have to attract expertise pretty much before they start going to college, start getting them interested in the aviation industry so they see aviation as a career. And so they can start deciding on aviation career, you know, before you know, they decide to go to some other industry.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Budd.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I thank the panel for being here. I want to talk about a different type of attack. It's an electronic attack, particularly GPS spoofing, which is increasingly impacting commercial and GA aircraft. I've had pilots send me photos of panels at 43,000 feet with a terrain warning. There's no terrain at 43,000 feet, particularly flying in the Middle East or overseas. Now, in the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024, it does have provisions to secure aircraft electronics against these sort of attacks, but there's additional, but my question is this, particularly General Reynolds, are there additional actions that Congress or the executive branch should take to address this growing issue?
Senator, thank you for the question. I think the piece I might offer is maybe talk a little bit about what we're doing right now with federal government that might help think about what kind of initiatives or resources might be beneficial to go after this problem. One is the FAA does a great job of actually highlighting where those interference patterns are actually happening. If you look at a globe, it's pretty extensive in the places you'd expect, around the Ukraine area in the Middle East. Having that kind of awareness before we actually fly into these locations is absolutely incredible and critical. The second is that we're working with the Aviation Cyber Initiative as they develop a concept of operation. So if pilots do in fact fly into an area, as the examples you just provided, they have the processes that they actually identify the issue and know where to report it. And then once the reports are actually made, then what can the FAA and others do to actually notify others and do mitigation if that's possible? In fact, it might part of that be contacting law enforcement. And then lastly, just recently I mentioned that we're doing with the ACI, or the Aviation Cyber Initiative, we just had a tabletop exercise on this very subject. And in that, we were trying to identify gaps and seams, communication breakdowns. And I think to your question, sir, as those initiatives to continue to evolve, I think it'd be well worth the time to talk with the FAA to see what resources they need to actually help all of us.
Very good. Thank you. I yield the time.
Thank you. Senator Duckworth, thank you for your leadership on the subcommittee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding today's hearing. The recent CTAC cyber attacks on CTAC is a real chilling reminder of the grave and growing risk to our nation's aviation system in cyberspace. These types of cyber attacks are serious crimes with serious implications that go far beyond mere passenger inconvenience. The source of the attacks, this most recent attacks, the Reseda ransomware, is an entity that is rumored to be based in Russia or within its sphere of influence. Reseda has been associated with attacks on the British Library as well as government institutions in Portugal, Chile, and Kuwait. It has also claimed responsibility for an attack on Prospect Medical Holdings here in the US. And this raises questions about national security. This is also not the first time a United States airport has been attacked, and in 2022, a pro-Russian hacker group that called itself KillNet orchestrated an attack on a dozen US airports, including LAX, Atlanta, LaGuardia, and both of the airports in Chicago, O'Hare, and Midway. And while thankfully the 2022 attack did not disrupt operations, we can't count on that always being the case. Attackers also target sensitive personal information. The cyber criminals behind the CTAC attack recently posted a ransom demand of almost $6 million, in which they threatened to sell stolen PII, like scanned US passports and forms with our social security numbers. Worldwide, aviation cyber attacks increased 24% in the first half of 2023, and they are ongoing. And just in the last 30 days, the city of Chicago's flychicago.com website blocked 1.09 million malicious site requests. Mr. Lyttle, what more should the federal government be doing to help airports harden their cybersecurity to protect against threats from foreign actors?
Senator, the aviation industry is required, for example, to submit the CIPs that was mentioned and the assessment plans, security improvement plans and assessment plans. And all airports are required to submit this. One way that we could help is if the TSA and CISA consolidate this information, comes up with best practices, and actually disseminate it back to the aviation industry. Currently, it's a one-way street that we're sending the information, but we're not getting back in a timely enough manner recommendations of how to improve our infrastructure. That would make a major difference.
Thank you. General Reynolds, I thank you for your service, and I couldn't agree with you more about the challenges of finding IT professionals who both know cyber and also aviation. What more should the federal government be doing to help airlines harden their cybersecurity to protect against threats from foreign actors, especially since so many of them are get maintenance overseas as well?
Senator, thank you, and thank you for your service as well. Thank you. I think I'll start with the 2 points I made earlier, which is first on harmonization. The fewer incident reporting requirements that we have, the better for us, so we don't spend all our time worrying about compliance, and more importantly, we want to make sure the information is going to the right places at the right time. The second part is on the information sharing. The improving information sharing, not just amongst ourselves in the industry side, but amongst the federal agencies and with each other The better we can do that at the speed of relevance, the better we all are going to be. Our programs rely on making sure we can stay ahead of the threat actors, and that information sharing is key to it.
Are there any additional vulnerabilities with foreign national airlines? So, because they're still accessing our systems. They're in partnerships with American Airlines, the Star Alliance, and all of these other, alliances. Are there vulnerabilities there?
I mean, I wouldn't want to talk, if there were, I wouldn't want to talk about the vulnerabilities specifically, but I will say our programs are threat-based and risk-informed, which means we do the analysis on anytime a system is connected or we share data amongst one another, we do that analysis to make sure the threats are known and they're minimized, in fact, to the 0 point if we can. I'm not an expert on the international carriers and what their exact systems are and the vulnerabilities, and I can certainly circle back and provide more information for you.
Thank you, thank you. I'm a pilot myself, and I know that, the basic thing in aviation safety is you should never be left to a single point of failure in any aviation system, and that redundancy saves lives. When Boeing left a safety-critical system on the 737 MAX depended on a single angle of attack sensor, 2 flights crashed, killing 346 people. So when I see the NOTAM system knocked out by an accidental file deletion, and so much of the aviation system knocked out by a CrowdStrike software update, that really worries me. That's a single point of failure, and we don't want that. So to better protect our aviation systems from cyber attacks, I believe we need to improve both redundancy and resiliency, and each of you have spoken to this. But Mr. Lyttle, I just want to give you a little more time. How can airports, airlines, and the federal government work better together to help improve the redundancy and the resiliency in our aviation systems computer networks?
Yeah, I think we have to do far more information sharing. We can always learn from each other. Airports can learn from other airports, and we can also learn from the TSA and CISA in terms of information that they're gathering and threats that they're seeing out there, and share this information immediately with the aviation industry. Airports in general have very robust cybersecurity, but nothing is impenetrable. Nothing is 100% secure. So if we can actually learn, each airport can learn from each other, and I think the consolidation point TSA, and that because we're required to submit all of these plans to the TSA and to CISA, I think if they consolidate this information, come up with a recommendation and standards in a much more timely manner, and disseminate that to the aviation industry so that we can continuously improve our cybersecurity defenses, I think that would go a long way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have a couple of questions, but first I wanted to sort of make a statement here. As our aviation sector becomes more reliant on modern network solutions, the need for stronger, more resilient operating systems grows to protect against malign influences, both foreign and domestic. Today, we face a rapidly changing threat landscape. Cyber attacks against airports and airlines are growing and becoming more sophisticated. Whether it's a breach of sensitive data, disruptions to critical operations, or ransomware attacks that cripple entire systems, these threats have the potential to cause widespread disruption. While I do not disagree with the emphasis of this hearing today, I believe that we also must draw attention to the self-inflicted wounds and failures experienced by our nation's aviation system and the national airspace and national airspace under President Biden and Secretary Buttigieg's leadership. In January of 2023, the United States experienced its first nationwide ground stop since 9/11. This was the result of an input error to the Notice to Air Emissions NOTAM system by an FAA contractor, causing the entire NOTAM system to crash. As a result, thousands of flights were delayed and or canceled, stranding hundreds of thousands of passengers across airports across our country. One of the Biden administration's first actions under the leadership of Secretary Buttigieg was to change the name of the NOTAM system from the Notice to Airmen to Notices to Air Mission to be more inclusive. Americans who are flying want to know that their systems are safe and reliable, not whether or not if we name our systems to be more inclusive or not. This is a consistent lack of leadership and priorities from this administration. Is way more focused on virtue signaling than actually safety. Additionally, late last year, cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike implemented a faulty software upgrade it deployed to Microsoft Windows customers, crippling airline operations in the United States that led to nearly 3,000 flights being canceled in one day. Delta Airlines in particular canceled nearly 7,000 flights
and faced issues for weeks from the software update failure. I make no mention of the increased number of near misses, mass cancellations, and issues faced by Southwest during the 2022 holiday season. Unfortunately, Secretary Buttigieg has shown blind willingness to prioritize woke ideology that values social, cultural merits over safety. I say all of this to validate that it's no coincidence that our aviation system faces its biggest inflection point right now. The American flying public deserves better leadership. And as I've stated over and over, this administration has failed time and time again. And by the way, Secretary Buttigieg has not been in front of this committee in 2 years that I've served on it. Mr. Breyault, I do have a question that I don't think this has been asked yet, but you know, TSA is in the process of deploying, you know, more biometric technologies at airports and at security checkpoints. If there is a cyber attack, how vulnerable is that data to hackers? This is one of those things that, like, we don't talk about much up here, but people back home, it's a question that they'll ask me is if they're signing up for Clear or something like that. How vulnerable is that very personal data?
So, Senator, thank you for the question. You know, there is no 100% solution in cybersecurity, and that would also apply to the biometric data that a consumer might share with TSA or as part of a Clear. And so I think that what that means is that each consumer has to do their own risk analysis on, I'm giving over, for me personally, and this is speaking for me, I don't sign up for Clear, particularly for those specific reasons. Because I'm unaware of how well they're protecting that data. And something like biometrics is, you know, I can't change my fingerprint. I can't change my face. That is a unique, persistent identifier of me. And while there may be good reasons to use that, and I think an argument can be made that biometrics can help prevent people from spoofing who I am and getting through TSA. I think Senator Blackburn was alluding to this in a question she had earlier. I do think there are legitimate concerns that consumers have, and so I think it's incumbent on all entities, including government agencies like TSA, that collect consumers' information, particularly the sensitive personal information, and I think biometrics has among the highest levels of sensitivity to protect that, because in the wrong hands, it can be used for harm.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Welch and then Senator Rosen.
Thank you very much. I was going to ask Lance Lyttle a question about what happened at SeaTac. First of all, my understanding is that SeaTac had some backup information, or it had backup access, so that it wasn't, that mitigated significantly the cyber attack. Is that right?
Yes, we did have backup, and the backup was not compromised.
Yeah, well, that's terrific. Thanks for that. Just one question. On the passengers, were they all able to get everything that they had lost, baggage and so on?
So when we just started, because we had to shut basically the systems down so we could prevent any further attacks, we had to actually execute our continuity of operations plan, and one of them is actually to start doing sorting bags manually. We also had to implement what we call a fallback tag, where we do a semi-manual process with bag tags, because the system that the airlines used to actually access the bag tag information, that system was inaccessible. So we had our two backup plans that we actually used to go through that process until we actually restored access to what we call the bag sortation messaging system.
How long did that take before folks got their bags back?
It depends. They varied for the different airlines. So for, I think, Alaska and Delta, we got that back in like 2 days. And then for the other airlines, it took us a little bit longer.
Thank you. You know, the other thing in that hack, a lot of individuals had their private information compromised, or could be compromised. And the question I think I have for you, but it also would apply if this happens again, and obviously there are bad actors out there that are hoping or trying to make it happen again. Is there monitoring on behalf of those folks whose information may have been compromised, so that if it is used, they're given that information? That is something that was provided after the OPM hack. in the government?
Yes, so any employee that we find out that their personal information has been compromised, we're going to notify them immediately, and we're going to provide credit monitoring as well.
So you're actively doing that? You'll know if there is one of your employees that has had his or her information compromised, you'd be able to alert that person?
Yes, we'll alert them immediately, and we'll provide credit monitoring and any other support services.
And I'm not sure how much information about this hack you have decided CTAC has provided, but is it committed to sharing more details and the lessons learned as more information becomes available?
Yeah, definitely. We just immediately when the incident happened, we actually a call was facilitated through Airport Council International, where we got all the airports and some airlines together just to let them know exactly what was happening so they could take actions to prevent it from happening there as well. In addition, we're going to conduct an after-action report that's going to be done by a third-party vendor, and we'll share that information industry-wide so everybody can utilize it to improve their cyber defenses as well.
All right, thank you very much. And for Marty Reynolds, have all the flying passengers who were impacted by the CrowdStrike outage been adequately and fairly reimbursed for their travel?
Sir, thank you for that question. My expertise is in cybersecurity, and it's not in accommodations. And I want to make sure I get you the right answer and an accurate answer to your question. So I'd like to take that back and provide you an answer.
Well, I'd like it if you would do that. I appreciate that. And let me ask John Breyault from the Consumers League. You know, when I fly, a lot of folks around me are using the internet. And what's the security situation with respect to Wi-Fi in flight?
Senator, thank you for the question. While I can't speak to sort of specific security tools that airlines implement for their in-flight Wi-Fi, what our general advice to consumers is whenever they're using a public Wi-Fi network, and I think this would definitely apply when you're on an airplane, is to avoid sharing sensitive information. So for example, if you are, I would advise against doing things like online banking, for example, if you're on a public Wi-Fi network, because you just don't know who may be snooping on that signal. So, I think that generally applies to in-flight Wi-Fi, though I'd be happy to see what I can find and get back to you about sort of if there are specific security protocols.
Yeah, I'd like that. So you're suggesting that folks who are using in-flight Wi-Fi take precautions as they would potentially in any public access Wi-Fi situation?
Yes, Senator.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I'm so glad our colleagues are showing up for this important hearing. I don't know if you're ready or not, Senator Capito. And Senator Rosen's been on the screen for some time, but I know Senator Peters, you were next. Would you be willing maybe to defer to Senator Rosen?
I would be happy to defer to Senator Rosen.
Okay, Senator Rosen.
Thank you so much, Senator Peters, and thank you, Chair Cantwell. I really appreciate that, and really appreciate you holding this important hearing on supporting airports and airlines against cyber attacks like the ones that took place in Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. You know, travel and tourism, I don't have to tell anyone, they are the backbone of Nevada's economy. Our airports are the gateway to everything we have to offer in Nevada, so we have to do everything in our power to protect them, along with heliports, air traffic control systems, and aircrafts. Together, this really is critical infrastructure. And this critical infrastructure faces complex and ever-changing cybersecurity threats and challenges that we must work together to address and mitigate. And so, Mr. Lyttle, I would talk a little bit about network segmentation, because in the wake of the cyber attack on your airport, you said tools ranging and networks ranging from employee email to passenger information systems and public Wi-Fi all became unavailable. So one of the first actions taken in response by the Port of Seattle was to isolate critical systems. However, basic cyber hygiene recommends that networks should already be segmented in a way that separates critical services, including the separation of public and internal systems. And so, Mr. Lyttle, I know Senator Welch talked about this a little bit, but in what ways were critical systems at the airport connected to public systems? So you have critical systems Were they connected to external websites? Were they connected to public Wi-Fi, whereby ransomware could really gain access to them and impact all of these systems at once? Are they segmented in such a way?
Yes, thanks for the question, Senator. One of the reasons why we were able to recover so quickly or to have some of our services not interrupted is actually because we have segmentation. So for example, our access control system was on a totally segmented network. Our conveyor systems were on a totally different network. So the network that was actually impacted, again, was segmented. That's something that we have been doing for years, and one of the lessons learned is we'll actually do more segmentation. But there are several systems at the airport that was not impacted because of segmentation.
Well, fantastic. I want to build on that with General Reynolds because we have airline networks. We know they interact with airport systems, airlines and airports. That's how you update a lot of information, right? So how vulnerable is this interoperability between the airlines and the airport systems in the event of a cyber attack? How do you segment or mitigate this threat as airlines and airports talk to each other? Of course, in this case, we'll just use this for an example, getting your bags.
Senator, thank you for the question. As I stated up front, our programs, mature programs, they're risk-based, threat-informed, which means we follow standard practices. For example, the cybersecurity framework that NIST puts out is one of the foundational principles that we follow, the standards that we follow. One of the things you do in those circumstances that you identify your systems and then prioritize those that are critical, less critical, and in that identification, you look for those connections you're talking about. And in those connections, you're then looking to see what controls can I put around those areas to minimize the risk that you may have when you connect systems to one another.
That's great, because I want to bring up something really important while you talk about connecting systems to mitigate risk, because we have third-party vendor cybersecurity issues potentially. Last month, cybersecurity researchers found vulnerabilities in a tool that supports the known crew member program, which allows pilots and crew members to pass through TSA without screening. So General Reynolds, to provide guidance to member airlines to ensure that they're doing their due cyber diligence with vendors. This intersects with airlines. It intersects with our security, our personal security, our homeland security. And would it be better to have all the airport crew, maybe they have their own lane, but they use the same kinds of identification that we use every day when we go through TSA?
Senator, thanks for that question. It's a good question. I will say my expertise is not known crew member program. That's not where my expertise is at.
Mm-hmm.
I will say we're happy to take your question back to those that are the program
thank you.
leads and try to get you better information.
Thank you. I sure appreciate that. And Senator Cantwell, thank you again. Senator Peters, yield back.
Well, thank you, Senator Rose. It takes a Cobot programmer to ask some really tough questions here for witnesses, so thank you for that. I think it's important, right, these issues on interoperabilities and vulnerabilities, because I think that's what we're really talking about today. The most vulnerable, we're only as strong as our most weak link, and that's what you're articulating there, so thank you. Senator Capito, followed by Senator Peters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, and thank you all for being here today. General Reynolds, I want to start with you. Cybersecurity insurance is becoming increasingly important across the country and across our economy, and certainly for the aviation sector. Senator Hickenlooper and I have a bill, the Insure Cybersecurity Act, which would help create a working group of experts to look at different ways to improve understanding and to share information so that potential customers are better equipped to make better decisions. Do you think this bill would be beneficial? I'm not certain that you know exactly, but also what kind of challenges are airlines facing looking at trying to secure cybersecurity insurance?
Thank you, Senator. And cyber insurance, it's a complex and it's always evolving. I think that's probably with the place I'd start is when you have your policy and you move from one incident to another incident and working with your insurance provider, you want to make sure you fully understand what's covered and not covered. Any new proposals you've mentioned, and I'm not as familiar with your proposal, but if a working group and it can be established and it can provide clarity in that space, then I think we'd certainly welcome it.
Yeah, thank you. You also mentioned in your testimony that airlines have to report to 10 different agencies with 10 different timelines and other reporting requirements. seems incredibly burdensome, but we want to ensure safety obviously first, as you do, or kind of a siloing of information. Do you have concerns that reporting on all these different agencies on different timelines poses a greater security risk because of the varieties, or do you think it provides more security?
Ma'am, I'm not sure it would provide greater security. I do know that in those instances, and we've not fully exercised it, thankfully. We've not had to fully exercise, having to report to all 10. But what I would suggest is that in the time that you are trying to identify and recover from an incident, the last thing you want to do is have to repeat the reporting and report on different kinds of definitions, thresholds. Data protections are different. So it's not beneficial, let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's burdensome and probably less efficient and
All the above, ma'am.
all of the above. I could go on and on, I guess. Mr. Lyttle, I understand that you decided not to pay the ransom. I'm sorry I missed the testimony, but you decided not to pay the ransom, and you mentioned that if any personal information is compromised, you're going to notify them and provide support from the wake-up call that you had at your airport. Let me ask you this. You're the 11th busiest airport, right, in the nation?
Currently.
And my airport in my capital city is the 189th, and this sort of goes to what the chairwoman was just talking about, in that you're only as secure as your weakest link. So all of our airports, but smaller airports, are just as vulnerable to these kinds of attacks and could get people into systems that could have impacts in all of our systems. What kind of perspective can you provide, having had this experience?
With regards to paying the ransom, that was contrary to our values, and we don't think it's the best use of public funds. So we decided not to pay. Information sharing, I think, is extremely important. Whereas our airport, being a much bigger airport, we have more resources. A smaller airport such as yours probably does not, but they can actually learn a lot from what we are doing and benefit from what we're doing, rather than starting from scratch to figure out how to improve their cyber defenses here. We have gone through this experience right now, and even though we had a lot of resiliency in place, continue to have operations plans in place, we're going to learn a whole lot from this experience as we conduct our after-action report. And I think sharing this information with large, medium, and small airports is going to be beneficial to the entire industry, not just with airports, but also with airlines as well.
Right. So under Homeland Security, we have an organization that's chaired by Jen Easterling, which is the CISA. It's the Critical Infrastructure for Cybersecurity. And they bring best practices around. I'm sure that your organization has talked with them to report your incidents, so it could help other airports as we move forward. So I want to put a little plug in for Marshall University in my home state of West Virginia is creating a Cybersecurity Institute for Critical Infrastructure, of which aviation is a part. We think of it, we think of it finance and military and defense, but if somebody knocks out our critical infrastructure, as we've found out in certain instances for one thing or another, we're as vulnerable, and maybe in some ways more vulnerable, food supply, et cetera. So what the point of this institute is to create a workforce that can then meet the cybersecurity challenges of the future in our critical infrastructure space. So I may have my folks reach out to you to find your experience, and it might be useful to them as they're creating the curriculum for the cybersecurity workforce of the future. And I appreciate you all.
Happy to participate in that.
Thank you.
Senator Peters, thank you for your indulgence. Very much appreciated. But so happy to have you here because of your role in the Homeland Security Committee and this committee too. So thanks for your leadership.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. It's great to be here, and thank you to each of our witnesses for your testimony here today. An incredibly important issue. Mr. Lyttle, you have been testifying here today, and thank you for your very detailed testimony and the work that you have engaged in to combat the extremely concerning incident that occurred at SeaTac. And although this hearing has been focused on cybersecurity and aviation, it certainly shows that this attack also highlights, I think, other cybersecurity attacks, including our ports, our maritime ports. Michigan is the home to 33 active cargo ports that ship or receive cargo. They handle 51 million tons of cargo, over $4 billion annually. And I think we all agree it's imperative that the necessary cybersecurity resilience practices are utilized at all critical infrastructure, including our ports. That's why I'm introducing the Protecting Investments in Our Ports with Senator Cornyn to ensure that ports receive digital infrastructure grants from the Port Infrastructure Development Program and have cybersecurity procedures in place to protect their digital projects. So, Mr. Lyttle, in your testimony, you mentioned how this attack impacted some of the maritime assets with the Port of Seattle. So could you discuss the added complication of this attack being carried out against both aviation and maritime operations, and how these systems basically being interconnected may have impacted your response? That would be helpful.
Yes, in an environment where it's just an airport environment, it's limited maybe to a local area network. With our infrastructure, because we also have the maritime operation, we have a more wide area network, or some may consider it a metropolitan area network that's spread across multiple facilities. So that made it more complicated. One of the good things is that we have an information technology and information security department that has responsibility for both the maritime institution as well as the aviation institution as well. So it's more complicated to manage because of the various different locations that falls under that responsibility. However, as I mentioned earlier, the networks are segmented. So some of the services at Maritime Institute was impacted. For example, recreational boating, fishing, those were impacted, but cruise were not. And the cargo operation was not impacted as well.
Very good, thank you. Well, I think we all agree that crafting strong and effective cybersecurity requirements is a task that federal agencies must undertake to ensure safety and security of our critical infrastructure. And I certainly appreciate the very detailed discussion that we've had here and my colleagues have had on the need to maximize the amount of cybersecurity teams that they spent on actual security versus compliance, which has been an issue. We need to streamline those requirements. And I have really good news. It's good to come to a committee hearing with good news. I introduced a bill with Senator Langford, the Streamlining Federal Cybersecurity Regulations Act, which is attempts to try to make compliance with multiple regulatory agencies a whole lot easier. And I would certainly welcome my colleagues on this committee to join me in this bill. And Mr. Reynolds, thank you. Thank you for your support of this bill and your testimony, and I look forward to continuing to work with you on that issue. Mr. Breyault, something we've seen happens after major cyber incidents is that other bad actors, including cybercrime groups, use the originating cyber attack to target Americans and commit fraud. For example, in your testimony, you discussed bad actors launching phishing attacks after the recent CrowdStrike incident to defraud victims. These groups, as you well know, take millions of dollars of hard-earned money from honest folks. And question for you is, what do you recommend for how we could work to prevent and respond to these post-attack fraud incidents? What are your top recommendations?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Number one, in the aviation sector, consumers don't have any control over when these cybersecurity events happen. All they see is the downstream impact of it, the missed flights, the lost airline miles. And so I think it's very important that Congress and DOT consider policies that will help consumers recover when incidents that are harming them through no fault of their own happen. That's why in our testimony we have called for Congress to codify DOT's authority to implement delay compensation regulations, which they have a rulemaking teed up for this January, as well as requiring that stolen airline miles have the same protection that stolen money has when a scammer gets a hold of my credit or debit card and uses it to run up a bunch of charges. We think that when those miles are lost, that's money that belonged to consumers that they've lost through no fault of their own, and that the airlines should be required to compensate them for that.
Very good. Well, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, again, for all your work. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Again, thank you, Senator Peters, and look forward to working with you on your port security ideas with you and Senator Cornyn. Very, very important. I know you're just arriving, Senator Markey, but you're a fast study, and you might be ready. But if not...
Ready to go.
Okay, Senator Markey.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for having this very important hearing. On July 19th, a CrowdStrike IT outage caused mass disruptions across multiple critical sectors of the U.S. economy. While the outage itself wasn't a cyber attack, it laid bare the vulnerabilities of our connected IT systems and put a spotlight on the chaos that can erupt when these systems aren't protected. Mr. Breyault, yes or no? Do you agree that airline consumer protection policies are an important part of an airline's broader cyber strategy?
Yes, Senator.
And from my perspective, no matter how much airlines prepare, there will still be disruptions, and we're going to have to be ready to support travelers, okay? And so we thank you for that. As we saw with the CrowdStrike outage or the cyber attack on the Port of Seattle, disruptions, even if resolved quickly, have serious consequences for travelers. In the case of the CrowdStrike outage, thousands of consumers were left stranded and confused about their rights as travelers. The recent FAA Reauthorization Act took important steps towards protecting consumers in these scenarios. I'm particularly proud that the law contained my provision requiring airlines to provide travelers with an automatic refund in the case of a flight delay or cancellation if the consumer does not accept a rebooking or a voucher. In many ways, the CrowdStrike incident was a stress test for this important provision. Unfortunately, reports suggested that airlines were failing to comply with this provision, arguing that it had not taken effect. As I explained in a bipartisan letter with Senator Josh Hawley, that just is not true. General Reynolds, we just heard that the treatment of consumers during a cyber-related event must be a part of a broader cybersecurity plan. Will your members commit to following the law and providing automatic refunds when required, such as during a disruption caused by a cyber attack?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, we comply fully with all the laws and regulations.
So that means you will, in fact, provide for the refunds?
So if that's what the law provides, and again, I'm not an accommodation expert. I would defer to our folks that actually work in this range.
Well, it's absolutely critical that there be compliance. The harm is real. The airlines have to protect against it. And if not, and the flight doesn't take off, it's the responsibility of the airline. You just have to continue to update. It's a corporate responsibility to spend the money to protect. And when they don't, and there's a successful attack, it's just because the protections weren't built in. Flight disruptions over the past few years have further made clear that refunds and vouchers aren't enough to make consumers whole. So, Mr. Breyault, I want to walk through a couple of scenarios with you. If a flight cancellation, whether from a cyber attack or maintenance issue, causes a traveler to miss a Taylor Swift concert or an NBA game, does the traveler get reimbursed for the event ticket?
No, Senator.
What about the cancellation? What if the cancellation causes a stranded traveler to miss a shift at work, losing crucial income that that family was counting on? Does an airline compensate them for that lost income?
No, Senator.
And if a passenger misses their kid's birthday party or school play, well, let's be honest, no amount of money can truly make up for missing those special moments, but you all get the idea here. There's a loss that these families suffer. So whether a flight delay or cancellations is caused by a cyber attack, thunderstorm, or maintenance issue, the cost for a traveler extend far beyond the flight ticket. Europeans understand this. That's why Europe requires airlines to provide a cash payment to passengers for significant flight delays and compensation beyond refunding a ticket or reimbursing a passenger's hotel room and airport transportation. U.S. travelers deserve similar protections. And that's why I am so pleased that the Biden-Harris administration plans to issue a proposed rule requiring airlines to provide compensation to consumers when a flight delay or cancellation is the airline's own fault. Mr. Breyault, do you agree that requiring cash compensation for delayed and canceled flights that are the fault of the airline is an important component of protecting consumers?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. So this type of regulation is long overdue and is the third C in my 3 C's of consumer protection: communication, correction, and compensation. When airlines screw up, they must communicate passengers' rights and options. They must correct their mistake by providing automatic refunds, and now we need to make sure airlines compensate passengers when the flight disruption is within the airline's own control. So I look forward to working with both the National Consumers League and the airlines on this issue. The leading company, EMC, was in Massachusetts, is in Massachusetts, and when I asked the CEO, why do we keep having these successful cyber attacks, he said in most instances, the CEO just didn't want to spend the extra money to upgrade. Okay? You just have to keep doing it. It's a cost of doing business. And when they don't do it, there's going to be a price, and we just can't have it be passed on to consumers. It's not their fault. It's the airlines that they didn't do it, and they shouldn't have to swallow a $1,000 Taylor Swift ticket, because the airline did not build in the protections. So we thank you, Madam Chair, and great hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Markey, and thank you for your leadership in the FAA bill and getting those provisions to protect consumers. And yes, we're hearing more about the theft, particularly today, of the mileage program and the need to protect that. So, but again, appreciate your leadership and communication on this. I'm just going to ask a couple of just round-up questions, and I think we're done with other members here, and then we'll adjourn. But one of the key messages from today is the need for communication. And I want to clarify now what is that immediate step on impacting that communication, best practices. We know that there is an ARC process at the FAA on cybersecurity, much bigger picture. That's going to take a while. But what now are we doing? So, Mr. Lyttle, who is the lead investigator on this attack? Is it the FBI or?
Yes, the FBI is.
Okay, and then what would the witnesses suggest is the best communication framework right now until the ARC process works to communicate to other airports the best practices and things that should be implemented from this? I would like to see a list. One of the reasons we gave the NTSB a report requirement, an annual report requirement, because we didn't feel like people were emphasizing enough next steps after some of their indications from accident reports, what should happen. And so they have now done that, and I thought it was very successful. They came before the committee and basically said, yeah, these near misses aren't getting addressed, and then the next day, the then acting administrator convened and put out a requirement. So here, we're trying to get the same level of response. What would you suggest, Mr. Breyault or General Reynolds, to what in the near term is that process?
So, Senator, from a consumer point of view, clear communication and actionable communication from airlines to consumers is incredibly important. From the time that the breach or the cybersecurity incident will first impact their travel, consumers need to be made aware of that. Consumers often show up at an airport in the CrowdStrike instance, and we saw report after report that consumers were confused. They didn't know what was going on. They were getting mixed messages from the airlines and other sources about what the status was of their flight and if they were going to have to wait 30 minutes or if the flight was going to get canceled. So I think it's really important that any cybersecurity response plan have a component in there about communicating with the passengers about how this will impact the flight that they're waiting for at the airport that day, or the flight that they're going to leave home early in the morning to catch the next morning.
Mr. Reynolds, since this is a airport issue, but it affects airline capacity, what do you think the tool is for right now streamlining best practices and communicating that?
Senator, it's a very important question. The industry relies heavily on standards. And in fact, it's been founded on standards in many ways, and it's driven our safety record to the level it has largely because of standards. I would start there. It does take time to create the standards. It does take time to actually, you start with the best practice, then you start moving into the standards. I think the tabletop exercise we all talked about, I think that's also a very effective way for us to communicate with one another. We also participate with the Aviation Information Sharing and Analysis Center to share information back and forth with their members and our members as well. And I think the other part too I just referenced is that any opportunity for us to work closely with the federal government, either working groups or opportunities for us to share lessons learned, is beneficial for not just the industry, but also for the government as well.
Well, I think, does that exist right now? I'm saying I'm not sure that exists, that framework right now.
We are working with, on the information sharing, we are working with TSA, FAA, and others to develop and work with them on this very topic, information sharing. The TSA, in fact, they have a air domain and analysis, intelligence and analysis cell that has been very helpful. They lead in this case. We have meetings with them every day to talk about what's happening in the environment. There seems to be a really nice set of progress checks with them and the FAA and others to find ways in which we can improve information sharing. But it's in the early stages.
Yeah, I keep thinking about NARUC, and I was looking up trying to figure out what its acronym stands for, but it's basically a voluntary utility organization that decades ago did the same practice. Why? Because they were being impacted so much. And so I think that we have to figure out here how to formalize this now while the ARC rulemaking process at FAA is going through to see what we can get from just communication, a daily communication. As was said, people want to know, well, what's the next best thing to implement? And I'm pretty sure here it's going to be related to hygiene, which is pretty simple and pretty basic, but something that could get emphasized. And so maybe that is the FAA, putting that notice out, or maybe it's also the industry working collaboratively. And so that's what I think. We need both. In my opinion, we need both, because the industry can work very collaboratively very quickly, and they know the systems they're trying to improve. One thing, General Reynolds, since you're here in our state, there's been a lot of collaboration with the Guard and Reserve, because there's so many people who work in IT and are state guardsmen, and they would like to play a more active role here. So when you talk about the workforce shortage, you're thinking, well, what could they do to just, hammer home this hygiene issue and be part of a response? I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Absolutely, ma'am. I have business cards I'll hand to you, and if you have anyone who's interested in joining the airlines, we would love to have them. Phenomenal capability. I'm very familiar with the folks up there in your state. Phenomenal capability because they have their day job. They know the insights they can bring to the military is phenomenal. So appreciate you mentioning them. The Guard and Reserves do a phenomenal job in this space.
Well, I think they know what's their job, to protect us on critical infrastructure. So we've had this discussion with them in Washington, in the state of Washington, on cybersecurity for many years. And I think I had Senator Murkowski come to an event on this many years ago when we were looking at vulnerabilities, particularly in schools. And they were active and they had been deployed. There was a lot of cooperation between entities. But as this need continues to grow, and it's not just going to be in the aviation sector, other sectors, where are we going to get that workforce? And how are we going to get these evangelists out there communicating to people? But I think everybody here, I think the key takeaways: better protection for consumers on million-miler program, better communication to airport infrastructure and airport employees to harden our resources, that this is a growing issue. It's not going to shrink. The best way to do it is communicate what we need to do to harden those resources. Is that right? Okay. Well, thank all the witnesses. You have, the record will remain open for 4 weeks until October 16th. Any senators who'd like to submit questions, do so by October, by that time. And then 2 weeks from now, we will have the record complete. So thank you so much, and appreciate your willingness to respond to our colleagues. We're adjourned.